I'm going to show you a beautiful little study that I think could have arisen very easily from actual play, and that's why I really like it, actually. And there's a rather surprising finish to it. Don't forget to like, comment, share and subscribe, and do consider supporting us on patreon.com or PayPal. You'll find the links down there and up there. Right, here we go. Well, I posted this position on the community tab, and I was very interested to see the reaction I got. Some people said, oh, white's winning. Just like that. White's winning because the king is going to head for the g-pawn, and then this pawn will queen. When I introduced this study on the community tab, I did say it might be worth thinking about what you're trying to do as white, what you're aiming for. And certainly taking that pawn is not a bad aim. And that should direct your thoughts. But of course, in endgames, calculation is paramount. You have to think things through very carefully and also see what your opponent is up to. So, I mean, one thing is that remember that black is a pawn up. So if the position stabilizes, then black should win. So basically this journey over to the g-pawn, well, that is absolutely crucial for white. If that doesn't succeed, then things are pretty desperate. So let's take our first step towards this pawn and play king to e3. Now that looks pretty sensible. Now, I think there are a couple of you on the community tab that suggested, as a counter to this idea, simply pushing the pawns forward. So, for example, pawn to d5. But let's play king f4. And after c5, well, do you know what? I could try and calculate this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and queening with check. And black plays 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, that could be a draw. But the point is, white doesn't need to go for the g-pawn. You can play king e5, and that just finishes things off straight away. You're just going to take these two pawns. Pawn to d4, king d5. Take. White's a pawn up and wins easily. So let's go back. So king e3, d5 or c5, indeed, comes to the same thing. Definitely do not work here. Black has to bring the king across. So king b7. Now, if king e4, that's just the wrong direction. King b6, let's say king here, king c5. Basically, white's king is going to be driven back, and black with the next pawn is going to win very easily. So let's come back here. So black has just played king b7. We play king f4, of course, with a path through to the g-pawn. So if king b6, then king g5, and yes, white is going to win this by taking the pawn and then queening this pawn. But there is a defense to king f4. Black plays king c7. So this is where things start to get a bit more complicated. I think these first couple of moves are pretty simple. We know that white wants to head for this g-pawn, and bringing the king across is the only possible defense. Now, we have a couple of alternatives. We can either play king here or king here. Well, let's play the most obvious move first, king g5. So can black counter this in any way? Well, absolutely. Black's king comes across to attack that f-pawn. And there you go. You can't defend the g-pawn, but you can counter-attack. And black is winning. very simply. So for example, I mean, there's nothing better. I mean, if you bring the king back, then the pawns push. So if you take on g7, you take this. And now black is just a pawn up, and that's winning very, very easily. So let's come back here. So the direct move, king g5, simply loses. And now we can see that actually the position is much more complicated than you might imagine at first sight. So the only alternative really for white is to play the king into e5 to prevent the king coming to d6. So king e5. And now this is slightly sticky for black, because of course you would like to push those pawns, but if d5, let's say, then the king comes to e6 and gets through to that g pawn, and white will win. And likewise d6, of course. So what do you do about that? Not so easy. So the king goes back, king d8. Now, the only way to keep black, pushed back is to play king d6. You know, you simply can't allow the king to come to e7. So king d6. So now black is a bit stuck. I mean, white has had to divert from the plan to take the g pawn. Nevertheless, black's king is pretty stuck here. It must go to e8. If king goes the other way to c8, then the king will come in. So black has definitely averted disaster here. Now, what should white play? Well, if the king goes in again, then black's king will step up, and that's not too good. And if the king steps back, then the king steps up. Also not good. Okay, but we've got this pawn waiting. So, you know, what happens if we push this? Does this make a difference? Okay, let's try pawn to c4. Well, black just has to wait. King d8. Okay, we'll push again. c5. Has this made a difference? I'm afraid not. After this, the king has to move. If the king comes back, then king here. And, well, white's king is getting pushed back. And if king c7, yeah, same as before, basically. In this position, black plays pawn to d6, king takes c6, you take on c5, king takes c5 and king f6, and black wins just by taking that pawn. And the black king's in the ideal position to force that g-pawn home. So let's come back. So in this position, what does white do? Well, in fact, there is a really stunning way for white to hold this position, and I'll give you a moment just so you can try and work it out. If I tell you that there's a stalemate trick, that probably gives it away, but let's see the solution. Pawn to c3 is the key move. Very subtle. So black just has to wait here, and white pushes on. And black waits, and white pushes on, and king d8. Well, what difference does this make? Because surely if the king steps back, then the king comes up. Well, I mean, this is just winning easily for black. But there is a move that draws here, and well, if king e5 is not the move, we can do this by process of elimination. Pawn to f6. There's a stunning move for you. And that has to be taken. If the pawn moves on, then f7 and an f8 queen. So pawn takes f6, and that's stalemate. There we go. One of my favorite themes in the endgame. So let's do an action replay. Let's go right from the beginning. So king e3. Black's king has to come over. King f4. King c7. Now the king has to come to e5. King e5. Black's king goes back to d8. King d8. King d6. King e8. And now a very subtle move. Pawn to c3. King d8. Pawn to c4, king e8, pawn to c5, king d8, and then f6, and g takes f6. Stalemate. Beautiful stuff. Even in seemingly simple positions, you get positions with fantastic beauty. Hope you enjoyed that.